I was a widower with a daughter. She was a single mom with a boy her ex was trying to take away. I just wanted to help, but it didn't work out that way. The old house became our refuge and revealed to us the secrets of the past hidden beneath the floorboards. What we found changed not only us, but the whole town. Look all the way through, this house knows how to listen. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching from. The morning began like any other, with the quiet rhythm of habit and routine. I stood in the kitchen, pouring milk into my coffee, eyes half focused on the calendar magneted to the fridge. Meetings, deadlines, the usual. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds that filled the house, until a soft voice broke the silence. "Daddy, I want this one." The milk carton trembled slightly in my hand. I paused, the spout tilted mid-air, and turned slowly toward the kitchen island. Lily sat there, her legs swinging gently beneath her pink pajamas, a spoon in one hand and a piece of toast untouched on the plate in front of her. Her curls were wild from sleep, the kind that refused to be tamed even by the finest detangler, and her expression was steady. Serious in a way children rarely are. "This what, sweetheart?" I asked, setting the milk down on the counter. She pointed, not to anything in the room, but somewhere else entirely. Somewhere remembered. "The mommy, that one." I blinked, confused for a moment. "Which mommy, Lily?" She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Not the one from last night, the other one. From the cafe, the one who called me Honeybee." I felt a cold ripple spread across my chest, slow and disarming. My mind flashed back to the cafe 2 mornings ago. The woman with the dark curls tied back in a messy bun, the warmth in her eyes when she knelt down to speak to Lily, not as an afterthought, but as a person. A child-sized mug of cocoa placed in front of my daughter with quiet intention. That woman. Grace? No. Maria. "You mean the woman who brought us cocoa?" I asked carefully. Lily gave a small, deliberate nod. She asked if I liked lemon muffins. She listened to me when I talked about the puppy I saw in the park. She didn't pretend to be nice. There was no bitterness in her voice, only observation. Her words slid past my guard like thin blades, quiet and surgical. "Lily, honey, we don't really know her. We only met her once." She set her spoon down. Her voice lowered, not angry, not sulking, just resolute. "They all like you, Daddy, but they don't like me." I took a breath, but she kept going. "They smile at you, they talk to you, but they only talk to me if you make them. Some of them don't even look me in the eye." The air seemed to go still around us. My brain raced for words, for reassurances, for something parental and comforting, but I couldn't find it fast enough. "Me don't like me," she continued, "because I don't look like you, because I'm not your real daughter, because my skin is dark." I felt as though something inside me had shattered and was rearranging itself into unfamiliar shapes. I opened my mouth, but my throat clenched shut. "That's not true," I managed, weakly. "It is," she said. "No accusation, just certainty." I heard them. One lady said I must be from somewhere else. Another said you adopted me to look charitable. I closed my eyes. Shame swept through me with a force I hadn't felt since the day I signed the adoption papers and realized how many people viewed Lily as a gesture instead of a choice. But Lily wasn't finished. The lady at the cafe didn't care. She didn't care what I looked like. She smiled like Grandma used to, like she saw me, not the girl next to the rich man, just me. I walked slowly around the island and knelt beside her stool, placing a hand gently on her knee. "Lily," I said, my voice cracking, "you are my daughter. Nothing changes that. Not what people say, not what they think. You are mine. You hear me?" She nodded slowly, her eyes glassy but dry. "But they don't see me that way." I touched her cheek, struggling to hold back the emotion building behind my eyes. "Then maybe," I said, "maybe I've been looking in the wrong places too." She sniffled. "You think she remembers me?" I smiled through the ache in my chest. "I hope so." She leaned into my arms, and I held her there on the cold kitchen tile. the weight of her small body grounding me more than any anchor ever could. I'd spent my life building things, companies, deals, a reputation, but in that moment, none of it mattered. My daughter had just taught me the difference between being loved and being seen. I didn't go to work that morning. By 10, I was in the car, driving back toward the quiet strip of Eastwood, where the cafe was tucked between a florist and a used bookstore. The sign above the door still read Morning Song Cafe, painted in faded cream letters across old brick. A sandwich board near the door announced, "Fresh peach scones today." Inside, the cafe smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, like safety. A young barista greeted me with a warm smile and asked what she could get me. "I'm actually looking for someone," I said, clearing my throat. "Maria, does she work here?" "She's on break," the girl said, wiping down the espresso machine. "She'll be back in 10. "I'll wait," I replied and took a seat by the window, my fingers clasped together so tightly they ached. I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was it fair to show up like this? Would she even remember us? Would she think I was, desperate? Unstable? But I wasn't here for me. I was here because my daughter had reached for something real, and I refused to be the man who let it slip away. 15 minutes passed, then 20. And then she walked through the back door with a tray of mugs in her hands. Her hair was the same, tied back but already trying to escape. She wore a soft blue blouse with a name tag that sat crooked on her chest. She laughed at something the barista said, then moved behind the counter to tie her apron. I stood. She looked up. For a moment, there was no recognition. Then her eyes widened. "Mr. Mason?" she said. I raised a hand sheepishly. "Alex, please." She came forward, polite but cautious. "Did you forget something last time?" "No," I said quickly. "Well, yes, but not something I bought. I was hoping we could talk." She glanced over her shoulder toward the back, then nodded. "I've got 10 more minutes. There's a table outside." The patio was shaded by a crepe myrtle tree, its branches dappled with soft pink blossoms. We sat across from each other, the wrought iron table between us strangely intimate. "I know this is unexpected," I began, "and I'm sorry for showing up like this." She tilted her head slightly, waiting. "My daughter," I said, "Lily, she remembers you. She asked for you." Maria's expression softened. "She's the reason I'm here," I continued. She said, "You made her feel seen, like herself." Maria's fingers tightened around her mug. Her voice was quiet. "Kids notice more than we think." "I've been blind to it," I admitted, "to how lonely she's been, to how the women I bring around only pretend to care." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Why did you adopt her?" I paused, not expecting the directness, but I answered honestly. "My wife passed when Lily was an infant. We'd been trying for years. After her death, the silence in the house, it was unbearable. When I met Lily, she was 5 months old. She wrapped her hand around my finger and looked at me like I already belonged to her." Maria nodded slowly. "And since then? I've tried, I really have, but I think I've failed her in ways I didn't see. She sees the truth. She knows when someone's heart isn't in it." "She's a sharp soul," Maria murmured. "So is my son." "You have a son?" She nodded. "Jaden, 8, loves dinosaurs, hates peas." "Lily's obsessed with fossils," I said with a laugh. Maria gave a small smile. "I'm not here to ask for anything," I added quickly. "Just, if you're willing, maybe you could come by again. For Coco. For her." Maria studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "I'll think about it." And it wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no. And for the first time in what felt like years, I stood up from that table with the feeling that something real had just begun. The second visit happened on a Saturday morning. The air was clear, the kind of crisp you get in early spring when the light still leans toward winter, but the smell of grass is returning. Maria arrived just after 10, holding a paper bag in one hand and Jaden's small hand in the other. Lily had been watching the front window since breakfast, and when she saw them approach, she ran to the door like it was Christmas morning. There was no need for introductions. Jaden, shy but curious, stepped cautiously into our home, his wide eyes taking in everything from the bookshelf to the toy giraffe leaning against the sofa. Lily took his hand without hesitation and pulled him toward her room before Maria had even finished removing her jacket. Within 5 minutes, the house echoed with laughter and muffled thuds, the unmistakable soundtrack of children meeting each other on some silent frequency that adults could only dream of understanding. Maria and I sat in the kitchen, watching 2 mugs of tea grow cold while the distant sounds of dinosaurs and crayon battles floated down the hallway. She was different that morning, more open, less guarded. Her face still bore the lines of fatigue, but her shoulders rested more easily. I noticed it in the way she leaned into her chair, the way she let her fingers run over the rim of her mug, like she had the time to feel it. We talked. About small things at first, school lunches, cartoons, the horror of helping with math homework. But then, slowly, the words deepened. "He asks about his dad," she said, staring into the steam rising from her cup. "Less often now, but sometimes, usually when he sees other kids with theirs." I told him the truth, as best I could. "What is the truth?" I asked, gently. Left, that he didn't know how to love us both. I wanted to reach across the table to offer something, solidarity, understanding, anything. But instead, I said nothing. It felt right to let the quiet do its work. We took the kids to the park that afternoon. Lily and Jaden raced through the grass like siblings who had waited their entire lives to find each other. Maria and I sat beneath a tree, watching, occasionally laughing when Jaden made some dramatic dinosaur roar or Lily pretended to faint in exaggerated defeat. There was something unspoken between us, something tender and heavy at the same time. I felt it most when our arms brushed as we passed the picnic blanket, or when our eyes met for no reason at all. I didn't know what name to give it yet, and I wasn't ready to try. But peace has a way of inviting storms. 3 days later, while I was sorting through emails in my office, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man standing on the porch, maybe a few years younger than me, lean but tense, like someone who had learned to survive on suspicion and adrenaline. He wore jeans that hadn't been washed in a while, and his eyes darted behind me as if already trying to assess the layout of the house. "You Alex?" he asked, like the word tasted bad in his mouth. I didn't answer right away. Something about him made my skin tighten. "I'm Trevor," he said, "Jaden's father." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone flat. He crossed his arms. "I heard you've been spending time with my son, playing house, acting like you're the new man in his life." "I've been spending time with his mother," I corrected, "and with Jaden, because he and my daughter have become friends." Trevor scoffed. "Friends, right? You think I don't know how this goes? Rich guy sees a woman doing her best, thinks he can swoop in and save her. This isn't about saving anyone." "Sure it is, you just don't want to admit it." I could feel the old instincts rising, the part of me that knew how to dominate boardrooms and dismantle an argument before it fully formed. But this wasn't business. This was something much more personal. "She doesn't owe you anything," I said. "You left." "I had my reasons." "Then you can explain them to her, not me." He laughed, sharp and ugly. "You think this is over?" "I'm getting my kid back." I didn't answer. He turned and walked away without another word. That night, Maria's voice was thin on the phone. She had received the same visit, the same threats. Her voice cracked only once when she said, "I don't have the strength for a custody fight, not again." "We'll handle it," I told her. "You're not alone in this." But the fear in her silence haunted me long after we hung up. A week later, we were sitting in a conference room at a downtown law office. Maria, wearing the same black sweater I had seen her wear when we first met, looked smaller than usual, like the stress was folding her inward. Beside her sat a woman with glasses and a sharp smile, Sophie Lang, the family lawyer I had retained 2 days earlier. Trevor arrived late with an attorney who seemed barely interested in the details. They filed the paperwork that initiated a formal custody petition. The allegations were predictable. Maria was unstable, financially insecure, exposing Jaden to unfamiliar men. I wanted to leap across the table. Sophie kept a firm hand on my arm. Over the following weeks, Maria and I became soldiers in a quiet war. There were interviews, home visits, paperwork, endless meetings. Every day brought a new anxiety, a new headline scrolling through our minds. Jaden became quieter, though he never stopped laughing with Lily. But sometimes I caught him staring at nothing, his brow furrowed in thought. Then one afternoon, he came into my office holding a sheet of paper. "I wrote something," he said. I read it. It was a letter to the judge. His handwriting was careful, the kind that children use when they want to be taken seriously. It said things like, "My mom makes me feel safe. I don't want to live with someone I don't remember. I want to stay where I'm loved." Later that night, I found Lily writing her own letter. "He's my brother," she said without looking up. "Maybe not by blood, but by heart." Maria wept when she read both letters. We didn't talk about it. We just sat together, her hand in mine, as the kitchen clock ticked toward midnight. The court date arrived like a storm cloud. The courtroom was stark, too cold, too bright. Trevor sat stiffly beside his lawyer, eyes darting, lips tight. Maria sat on the opposite bench, one hand gripping mine, the other holding Jaden's. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a reputation for listening more than speaking. Jaden was allowed to speak in private chambers, and when he returned, he looked relieved. The ruling came quickly. The judge cited emotional stability, child preference, and history of care. Custody remained solely with Maria. Trevor was granted limited supervised visitation, if he chose to pursue it. I doubted he would. Outside the courthouse, Jaden stood quietly by my car. He looked up at me and held out a small envelope. Inside was a folded scrap of paper. It said, "I would like to be your son if that's okay with you." I couldn't speak. I pulled him into a hug, and when Maria saw us, her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not then. That came later. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Maria and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the early spring chill. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done for me," I said. She looked at me for a long time. "That's the thing," she said. "No one ever has." I leaned in. She didn't pull away. The kiss was slow, simple, real. In the silence that followed, I knew that nothing was settled, that there would be more storms ahead. But for the first time, we weren't weathering them alone. The house Maria and Jaden stayed in after the court ruling had always felt like a halfway space, neither temporary nor permanent. Not quite hers, but too full of emotion to be mine alone. I had invited them in for comfort, for safety, but it wasn't home, not for her, not truly. She kept her clothes in a suitcase tucked beneath the bed, her shoes in a neat line near the door, and her silence in every corner she passed through. At night, once the kids were asleep, we would sit together, close, sometimes even leaning into one another. But she never hung anything on the walls, never spoke of staying. One evening, while the kids were upstairs building forts with bed sheets and couch cushions, Maria stood at the back door with a tea towel in her hand, gazing into the yard. "I want a space that's ours," she said quietly. I turned from the stove, where dinner was simmering. "You mean a new apartment?" "No," she said, still looking out. "Not a place to live. A place to grow." I walked over and stood beside her. The garden was still recovering from winter, bare patches of dirt with only hints of green fighting their way through. "There's a place I've been meaning to show you," I said. The next morning, we drove an hour north to a property that had belonged to my family for generations. A white two-story farmhouse sat at the top of a gentle hill, flanked by tired oaks and a wide gravel path that led down to a small creek. The paint peeled in long strips along the siding, and a broken shutter dangled like a loose tooth beside the upper window. Weeds had swallowed the garden beds, and the porch steps groaned under our weight, but the bones of the place still stood strong. Lily ran through the high grass, arms out like airplane wings. Jaden followed with mock roars, pretending to be some wild creature stalking her from the underbrush. Maria stood in the doorway, her hand on the old wooden frame, and turned to look at me. "Is this what you meant?" she asked. I nodded. It was my mother's favorite place. She always wanted to fix it up. She died before she had the chance. Maria walked into the living room, her fingers brushing the faded wallpaper. The floor creaked in familiar, nostalgic ways. Dust swirled in the slanted sunlight like drifting memories. "It smells like stories," she said. We explored the house slowly, the way you walk through a memory. Lily and Jaden picked rooms for themselves. She wanted the one with the yellow window panes. He chose the attic because it has the best hiding spots. Maria gravitated toward the kitchen, where old iron hooks still hung above the stove. By the end of the day, we'd made our decision. I would buy the house outright from the trust. The kids would help pick paint colors. Maria would design the kitchen. It would take time and sweat and money, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the look in Maria's eyes as she watched Lily press her handprint into the dusty window pane. Over the following weeks, we spent every spare moment there. On weekends, we scraped wallpaper and hauled out old furniture, and on weekdays, we brought picnics to eat on the lawn after school. Lily painted pictures of what the rooms would look like. Jaden asked if we could bury a time capsule in the garden. One Sunday afternoon, as rain began to fall in a soft whisper, Jaden called down from the attic. "Come see this." We climbed the narrow staircase, expecting another fort or bug discovery. Instead, he pointed to a loose floorboard near the far corner. It had come up while he was pretending to dig for treasure. Beneath it, buried in layers of dust and forgotten wood, was a small tin box. We sat in a circle on the floor as Jaden pried it open. Inside were carefully folded letters, photographs with curling edges, a military medal, and a silk handkerchief that had once been white but now looked the color of dried leaves. The top letter was addressed to My Rose. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant. Maria began to read aloud. "My dearest, if you're reading this, I am already too far from home to feel your breath on my neck. I've gone where men must go when they are told they are brave, but bravery is not what I feel. I feel only the ache of your absence." The room went quiet. We read through letter after letter, dozens of them dated between 1942 and 1945. They were from a man named Joseph Walker, a soldier who had been stationed overseas. His words were vivid and gentle, filled with longing and hope. He wrote about the war, yes, but more often about memories. Of their garden, her laughter, the way her hands looked when she pulled bread from the oven. One line repeated in various forms across the letters: "If I am forgotten by the world, I know this house will remember me. I built it with my bare hands and my foolish love." We sat there for hours, passing the letters around, unfolding and refolding the fragile pages as if they were made of gold. That evening, Maria stood on the front porch, holding the medal between her fingers. "We can't keep this to ourselves," she said. So we planned something small, something quiet and honest. The next weekend, we invited the neighbors, those who still remembered the Walker family, those who had grown up hearing their names. We cleared out the garden and set up folding chairs beneath the oaks. Maria baked lemon bread and brewed tea. Lily made a hand-painted sign that said, "The letters beneath the floor." Jaden stood beside me, clutching a letter in his small hands. He read it slowly, carefully. "I dreamed of your pie last night. I could smell it, taste it, hear the sound of your voice calling me to the table. The world is loud here, Rose, but when I think of you, it goes quiet." People cried, some in whispers, some in open sobs. An older woman came forward after Enli Osler and said, "My father used to speak of Joseph, said he was the kindest man he ever knew." The house began to change after that day. It was no longer just a project. It was becoming a memory shared, a story passed on. We gave it a name, the House of Joseph and Rose Walker. Maria insisted we hang a photograph of the two of them near the front door, beside the letters, framed and preserved behind glass. That night, as we sat on the porch again, I noticed how easily Maria laughed, how her body leaned into the swing like she belonged there, how Jaden rested his head on her lap, already asleep. Lily curled up beside me, her hand in mine. Maria looked at me. "Do you think they're watching?" "Joseph and Rose?" I asked. She nodded. "If they are," I said, "I think they're proud." She smiled. "They built a home. We're just learning how to live in it." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The stars came out slowly, one by one, and the wind carried the faintest smell of jasmine. Somewhere inside, the house creaked again, not in protest, but in welcome. And for the first time since my wife died, I believed that love could find a second voice, one that sounded different but rang just as true. It was a humid morning when we finally finished painting the last room. Lily and Jaden, both splattered in streaks of seafoam green and buttercream yellow, had turned the hallway into their personal gallery. They'd framed their stick-figure drawings with masking tape, naming each piece with grand titles like Sunflower Hope and T-Rex at Sunset. Maria stood in the doorway of what used to be the old study, hands on her hips, a smile softening her eyes as she watched them admire their own work. The smell of fresh paint and wood polish hung thick in the air, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like something new being born. The house felt different now, not just cleaner or more colorful, but fuller. It breathed with us. Every window opened a little easier, as if the house had decided to cooperate. The creaks in the floorboards no longer felt ominous, but familiar, even affectionate, like the murmurs of an old friend. I had once believed houses were just structures, wood, nails, pipes, but this one had become a witness, a quiet, waiting thing that had held space for years and was finally beginning to speak. Maria's idea came during breakfast one day. Jaden had asked between spoonfuls of cereal, what would happen if someone else found letters under their house? I expected Maria to give a simple answer. Instead, she said, then maybe they'd remember what kindness feels like. That evening, we sat on the porch again, a pad of paper between us, and drafted the beginnings of something more than a household. A place where people could come, not just to remember, but to be remembered. We called it the Listening House. It started with small gatherings, a poetry night on the lawn, a potluck with neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years. Maria invited a retired teacher who had once known Rose Walker's niece. I contacted a youth program in the city and offered our home as a weekend retreat space. The kids helped convert the attic into a reading nook, lined with bookshelves and pillows and a sign that said, "Words live here." One afternoon, an elderly black woman named Mrs. Aldridge arrived with a bundle of handwritten notebooks. She had heard about the house through her granddaughter and wanted to share the journal of her father, a bricklayer who had helped build the stone wall that still stood near our garden. She walked with a cane and a sense of ceremony, placing the notebooks on our table as though she were offering a relic to a temple. "This house remembers," she said, her voice a tremble of pride. "Let it keep this too." We built shelves along the hallway to hold the stories. Not just Joseph and Rose's letters, but Aldridge's notebooks, the paintings of children who had visited, photographs sent in by families who once lived nearby, even recipes passed down on torn index cards. We digitized the collection, with Lily and Jaden learning how to scan and archive. Soon visitors began trickling in, first a few a week, then more. Some came for the history, some for the quiet, some just needed somewhere that didn't talk over them. Not everyone welcomed the change. At the town council meeting where we petitioned for nonprofit status, a man stood up and asked, why should a house like that matter now? He didn't mean it cruelly. He was just tired, the way people get when the world changes faster than they can understand. Maria stood. She wore a green blouse with tiny pearl buttons, her hair pulled back, her voice steady. Because silence, she said, isn't the same as peace. This house listened when no one else did, and now it lets others be heard. There was no applause, just a long silence and then a slow nod from the councilwoman, who cast the deciding vote. Months passed, the seasons turned, the garden bloomed and then withered and bloomed again. I would catch Maria in the kitchen sometimes humming while she cooked, her hands moving with the grace of repetition and joy. Lily's drawings evolved from crayons to pastels to charcoal sketches that lined the stairwell. Jaden started asking bigger questions about justice, about war, about why Joseph Walker never came back. We talked about those things openly, honestly, without pretending to have all the answers. One rainy evening, a man arrived on the porch, soaked through and clutching a crumpled photograph. His name was Leonard, and he had driven all the way from Pennsylvania after reading an article about us in a regional newsletter. The photo showed a boy, maybe 9 or 10, standing in front of the Walker house, grinning with a baseball glove in his hand. "That's me," he said. "I used to live here. Rose let me stay for a summer when my mother was sick. I'd forgotten until I saw the picture in the article. Then it all came back." Maria made him tea while he wandered through the halls. When he reached the attic, he sat in the window seat and cried. "I thought this part of my life was gone," he whispered. "But it waited for me." Sometimes at night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the distant rustle of trees, I would lie awake and think about how far we had come. Not just from the day I first met Maria or the moment Lily said she wanted that one to be her mother, but from the life I had before all of this, a life of briefcases and negotiations. Important things, I had told myself, necessary things. But they hadn't listened to me the way this house did. This house had taught me that memory is not just what we keep, but what we choose to pass on. That healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers from under a floorboard. That love can grow again, not despite what came before, but because of it. The day we legally adopted Jaden, we didn't go to a courthouse. We held the ceremony in the garden, under the oak tree, surrounded by friends and stories and laughter. Maria read a letter she had written him. Lily presented a drawing of our family, 4 figures, arms linked, standing before the house with open windows and a glowing roof. I spoke last. "I wasn't your first father," I said, looking at Jaden, "but I promise I'll be your last, and I will never stop listening." He hugged me so tight my ribs ached. We buried a time capsule that afternoon near the garden steps. Jaden's drawing of a dinosaur, Lily's note about finding a sister, one of Rose's letters, and a page from Joseph's journal. A small plaque marked the spot, "For those who come next." Years from now, maybe someone will find it. Maybe they'll open it and feel what we felt. A thread pulled across generations, something tender and invisible made real. That night, long after everyone had left and the kids had fallen asleep under blankets patterned with stars, Maria and I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms wrapped around each other. The house creaked gently behind us. "Listens," she whispered. I nodded. So do we. And for once, the silence that followed didn't need to be filled. It was whole. It was home. If this story moves you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch our next video for another powerful journey, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs it.